Hey guys, Vatche here from Solo Guitars. I'm about to show you how to get a Floyd route in about 30 minutes to an hour using our newest template set. Now, most of you know that we do have a pretty wide range of templates. This, however, is probably my favorite. I've designed it to pretty much take any guesswork out of routing a Floyd. It could be a very daunting task, and the reason why I actually created it is because I did it a couple of times, customers' requests, on our CNC machine, and the setup time was just so long that it just didn't make sense to do. So I came up with this system, and honestly, it will take all the guesswork out. All you have to do is just find the center line one time, and with this set, you'll actually end up having it centered on both the top and the bottom, and I'll show you how in just a minute. Now in front of me, I do have the Solo FVK15 guitar kit. This guitar kit is actually equipped with a 2 pneumatic bridge and 2 humbuckers. Now I've already plugged the stud holes for the bridge, and because the bridge humbucker was going to be too close to the Floyd route, I've actually plugged that, and once we've finished the Floyd route, I will leave about a 1/2 inch gap and then reroute the humbucker for the bridge pickup. So this template comes with a top plate, a back plate, and 8 routing inserts, along with 2 acrylic dowels and a 6.1 millimeter drill bit. We'll get to why you'll need these in just a second. So the way this template works is once you get your center crosshairs, you affix the top template holder using double-sided tape. The inserts are all numbered, so all you have to do is go in sequential order and use the depth gauges on each insert. So how do we know where to put the template holders? Well, as you can see, we have these center lines on the holder, and over here it says 24 3/4 inch from the nut for a 25 1/2 inch scale, and 24 inches from the nut for a 24 3/4 inch scaling. So many people have different ways of finding the center lines on their guitars. The way I like to do it is I will put a really long ruler up against the inside portion of the nut on the neck. Make sure it's right up there. And I'm going to follow the trajectory of the neck as if it continued its angle right down the guitar. Now, once I have this line, I'm going to pick 2 arbitrary numbers. Doesn't matter which numbers you choose, just remember which ones they are because we have to repeat this step on the next side. So we'll pick 550 mil and 650 mil, just to make it easy. Now we're going to repeat the process on this side. Right on the inside portion, hug it against the neck, draw your line, and then put 550 and 650. And you'll find out why we did these in just a second. So the reason why we have these lines over here is because it's the only way to actually get a line that will be perfectly perpendicular to our center line. And that's important because you need to have a line that's straight that you can base all of your measurements off of. If I didn't have these lines and I just measured from the nut and said 24 inches is right about there, let's say, I would never know if my line is straight or on an angle. But with these lines over here, at least we have a perfectly perpendicular line to what will eventually be our vertical center line. So now that we have those lines, we can take our tape measure, and because this is a 24 3/4 inch scale length guitar, as the template says, we are going to go, our center line needs to be at 24 inches. All right, so once we have our 24-inch line, which is right there, so eventually our crosshairs are going to be here. So why did we choose these 4 arbitrary lines at the 550 and 650 millimeters? Well, we have to be able to find the exact center of this neck. So we followed the trajectory of the neck angle, and now we need the center. However, without having a straight line to go based on, if I'm trying to find the center of this, well, I don't know if I'm holding my gauge straight or slightly on an angle. This way, we have 2 points that we could measure from. So if we just take the measurement from that, we have 2.3 inches. So we can go 1.15. So we're just going to measure these 2 points right here. And we have 2.3 inches. So we want to go 1.15 inches in. 1.15. And that's right there. And then over here, because the neck goes on an angle, we now have a slightly bigger number. Over here we have 2.4 inches, so we're going to go 1.2. 1.2 will give us the center. And you can just take both of these lines and just draw a straight line going through them. And boom, you have a perfectly centered line going down your guitar. Now, we have a 24 3/4 inch scale length on this guitar. So as the top plate actually says, for a 24 3/4 inch scale length, we have to keep this line at 24 inches from the nut. Right there, have it marked off at 24 inches from the nut. Now the simplest way to go from here would actually be to have an angle or a T-square. I mean, it's a little bit excessive in terms of size, but at least we can get a perfectly perpendicular line. So if we line this up with our center line, and we know our center line is perfectly straight, we can then just mark this off. Right there. And then we can continue that all the way through. And there you have it. That will be our center crosshair. Okay, so now that we have our center line and the line that's going to dictate the distance from the nut to the center line on our plate, we can go ahead and attach this plate to the guitar body. Nothing fancy, just a little bit of double-sided tape will do the trick. All right, so now that we have our top plate center lines corresponding with our guitar center lines, we've double-sided taped that down, and now we are ready to use our inserts within the top plate. Now the inserts, like I said, they're all numbered and they all have depth gauges on them. And so with every route, with every insert, you'll know how deep you have to route that particular insert. Now these depth gauges actually include the thickness of the template themselves as well, so do not add that ½ inch. Just take it for what it is. Now the very first one we're going to be doing, that's labeled top 1, and it also tells you to drill through the body. This, like we mentioned before, will be the locating pins to find the center on the back of it. Now for this step, we're going to be using the drill bit and the acrylic dowels that have been provided within the template. I cannot stress enough, you should not freehand drill this. You need to use a drill press or one of those drill press attachments for handheld drills. But if you go in freehand, chances are your holes will end up being on an angle, and these dowels, although they will go in, when you have to do the insert on the other side, the holes will not line up and your entire project will be off center. So we're gonna go to the drill press and actually drill out these 2 holes with this and put the acrylic rods in. All right, so now we have our 2 holes drilled out on the drill press, and you can see they go through the body. I'm not worried about the tear out. Like I said, this is going to be the trim block void afterwards. So now we can take our acrylic dowels, should be pretty snug, and just feed them all the way through. All right. Now that we have them fed all the way through, we're going to find the insert that says back locating insert. Now we're going to take this insert and slide it over those 2 dowels and put that in place. And then we are going to take the back plate and slide that into place. Now, because of this, we know 100% that our top plate and our back plate are 100% centered within each other. So any inserts we put in throughout this side and any inserts we put in throughout this side will be perfectly centered. So we're going to leave that there for now. So now that we have this back locating insert in place, we are going to take the back plate and just put some double-sided tape on it. All right. We're going to slide that back plate, make sure it's nice and snug for a double-sided tape. Now, you could leave this if you want, or you can get rid of it. We don't need it anymore. All right, and there's your dowels. Now we can flip it back, and now we can do our second route, or first route, second insert. So to route these out, I'm actually using 2 different bits. These are the Pesa bits that are offered at Solo Guitars. I'm actually using a plunge router, and this particular router actually has a depth stop. And that will really come handy with our depth gauge. So we are just going to push the platform down, make sure your depth stop is out all the way and it's loose. And we are actually going to push that in until our bit reaches that line. Once our bit reaches that line, we can go ahead and tighten that depth stop. Now, we know that we won't be passing the depth we need to for this particular route. All right, now that we're done with the second one, we can move on to the third one, and we're gonna go through each one of these one by one. All right, so as you can see, after our first pass on my fourth insert with the 1/4 inch bit, I stopped. And the reason for that is, remember how I told you we're gonna need a second bit? Well, because of the way the Floyd route is, now if you look right about right there, there's actually a gap. between where we've routed and the base of the template. And the reason for that is we have multiple depths. So this part over here, once we put the template on, leaves a gap between the bottom of the template, and as you can see, like I can get my finger in there. So if we were using the smaller bit, what's going to end up happening is that bearing is going to go in that void right in there, and you're just going to end up carving through the actual template itself. So this is where the 1-inch bit is going to come in handy. We are going to swap out our 1/4 inch for our 1-inch length. And always remember, that bearing has to be exposed. I've done it myself where the bearing ends up, you don't want to carve too deep, so that bearing ends up being underneath the plate. And what that does is it no longer gives any guidance for the router bit, and it'll just carve right through it, all of it. So make sure that bearing is always exposed so that it can follow that template right there. So we're going to go ahead and change this bit to the 1-inch bit. All right, so now that we have our bit changed, we're going to go ahead and follow the same steps we did last time in using the actual depth gauge on the insert to find out how deep we have to go, and then taking it one step at a time. All right, so now that we have our bit changed to the 1-inch cutting surface, we can go ahead and follow the same steps we were doing before by using the depth gauge on the actual inserts to lock in our depth gauge on our routers, and then taking it, I would say, anywhere from 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch at a time. Some people like to take more, some people like to take less, but with my experience, I like to take either somewhere in between 1/16 and 1/8 of an inch thickness with each pass. Does the bits good, it prevents the wood from burning, and it prevents the entire place with filling up with dust. All right, so that about sums it up for all the routes that need to go on the top of the guitar. The last piece we have to do to the top, the number 5 insert, is actually the holes for the studs. Now you'll notice that the holes won't be the same diameter as the studs that you'll be installing. And the reason for that is we found that different companies actually use different lengths and different diameter studs. Goto, Floyd Rose, for whatever reason, they seem to be different. So we're only doing pilot holes using that same drill bit that we used for those acrylic dowels. After that, you can go ahead and measure the studs that you're going to be installing, and using the appropriate drill to drill the appropriate diameter and the depth. All right, so as you can see, I've gone ahead and drilled those pilot holes for those mounting studs. Again, these are pilot holes. Depending on which trim system we decide to install, I'll measure those stud diameters and make the holes accordingly. Now we can flip it over and route out our spring claw cavity and our trem block cavity. The beauty of it is, because we used our indicating pins earlier and have this double-sided tape, we have no more measurements to take. We literally just put in the inserts that need to go within the top plate and route those out. Now, if you remember, we switched our router bit to the 1-inch to get to those deeper routes on the top route. Now, because the template is 1/2 inch and the router bit cutting surface is 1 inch, and if we go ahead and expose that bearing, which is the least we have to do in order not to chew through the template, that means we're going to be taking off 1/2 inch in one pass. Can't do that. So we're going to start back with our 1/4 inch bit and then work our way to our 1 inch eventually. All right, so now we have our bit changed. I'm not going to use the depth stop for the simple reason that the depth we have to go for the spring claw cavity is actually much deeper than I'm willing to route with my 1/4 inch bit. So as you can see over here, if I loosen this up, you see our depth line is right about there. this router bit won't even go that far without actually having the caller chew up the template. So I'm actually just going to do a few passes with this smaller bit, and then once we change back to our 1-inch bit, at that point we can set in our depth stop. So I'm only going to go about, I would say, 2 passes at 1/8 of an inch per pass, so about 1/4 inch with the smaller bit, and then we'll switch over. All right, so we routed down about 1/4 inch. Now we're ready to take this to the 1-inch bit. I'm taking this off because once I put in the 1-inch bit, I'm going to use that depth stop gauge. All right, so we have our bit changed, and now, again, we are just going to go ahead and set our depth in accordance with the gauge on the actual insert. And again, you have to make sure that that bearing is exposed. All right, so we did our spring claw cavity. Now we only have one final route to do. There you have it, folks. A perfectly clean Floyd route without the hassle of hours and hours of measurements. This looks like it was done on a CNC. The template will take all the guesswork out of what is probably one of the most daunting routes that you could do on a guitar. We're constantly adding to our channel, so be sure to subscribe to never miss a beat.